All right, let's dive into AI governance.
I know.
I know you're thinking self-driving cars, robots taking over the world,
Right, that's the flashy stuff.
but it's so much bigger than that, right?
Way bigger. Think about algorithms, the ones deciding about loans, healthcare, even who gets a job.
Yeah, that's some serious power. But with great power comes great responsibility, as they say.
Exactly. That's the core of it, right? Huge potential for good, but, well, there's a flip side, like what happens when things go wrong?
Okay, so let's not sugarcoat it. What are we talking about here? What can actually go wrong with AI?
Well, let's say a self-driving car makes a bad decision. That's obviously a big deal. But think about an algorithm denying someone a loan based on bad data.
Oof. Yeah, that's hitting where it hurts.
Right. These aren't just theoretical problems. The impact on people's lives can be huge.
So that's where AI governance steps in. It's like, how do we put guardrails on this powerful technology, make sure it's used ethically, effectively? That's what we're going to unpack today.
Yeah, we're going to equip you with the knowledge to navigate this whole complex landscape. We're diving deep into a source called AI Governance Framework, a simple guide for organizations.
Love that title. Straight to the point. So, no more theory. We're going for practical takeaways here, stuff you can actually use.
Absolutely. Practical advice, no jargon.
Give me an example. Like, in the real world, why do we actually need AI governance?
Well, the guide mentions this thing called AI hallucinations.
Hallucinations. Sounds trippy.
It kind of is. Like when AI chatbots, sometimes they just spit out totally nonsensical stuff. Or even make up facts.
Okay, that's a little freaky.
Right. Now imagine that happening in a medical diagnosis system.
Oh, wow. Okay, suddenly AI governance seems a lot less abstract and a lot more urgent.
Exactly. And the guide also talks about job displacement. This is a big one.
The robots are coming for our jobs, huh?
It's a real concern, and AI governance isn't about stopping progress, but it's about anticipating those impacts, figuring out ways to soften the blow.
Right, so it's not just about the tech itself, it's about the human side of the equation, too. So this AI governance framework lays out 5 key components. Where do we even start with this whole AI governance journey?
Okay, so the first step is risk identification and assessment. It's about being proactive, not waiting for a disaster to happen, you know.
Makes sense. So how do we do that?
The guide points to the MIT AI risk database. This thing is massive.
What do you mean massive?
Like over 1,000 documented risks associated with AI.
Wow. That's a lot to think about.
Right. But it's a good thing because it forces you to think systematically about all the what ifs. What if this AI goes rogue? What if that AI makes a biased decision?
So it's like a giant warning system, flashing all the red lights you might miss otherwise.
That's a great way to put it. And then comes assessment. How likely is each risk to actually happen? What would the impact be if it did? How much risk are you actually willing to tolerate?
So you have to prioritize, right? Figure out which risks need the most attention, come up with strategies to handle them.
Exactly. It's not about eliminating all risk. That's impossible. It's about managing it intelligently.
So first we've got risk. Got it. What's next? What's the next piece of this AI governance puzzle?
All right. Next up, regulatory and ethical analysis. This is where things get a bit tricky, to be honest.
Oh, I bet. Why is that?
Well, because there's no single global rule book for AI. Every country's doing its own thing.
Oh, man. That sounds like a headache. So what are we working with here?
You've got the EU AI Act, the US NIST AI Risk Management Framework, a bunch of ISO standards.
Okay, so it's like a patchwork of regulations.
Exactly. And to make things even more fun, the definition of AI itself can be different depending on which framework you're looking at.
Ah, so how do companies even begin to navigate this maze?
The smart move is to adapt to the strictest regulations. That way, you're covered no matter where you operate.
Makes sense. Better to be safe than sorry, especially when we're talking about something as powerful as AI. All right, so we've tackled the risk in the regulatory landscape. Where do we go from here?
Now we got to look inward. The third component is impact assessment of existing standards and processes. How does AI governance fit into the structures that are already in place within an organization?
So we're not building a whole new system from scratch.
No, not at all. It's about taking stock, looking at what you've already got.
So what are we looking at specifically?
Well, corporate governance, for one. Traditionally, companies have committees, risk registers, all that stuff for overseeing technology, right? But AI, it's different.
Different how?
It touches so many parts of an organization, from HR to product development to marketing, even finance.
Yeah, that's true. It's everywhere.
Exactly. So you can't manage it in silos. You need a more a holistic approach.
So it's more of an ecosystem-wide issue.
Precisely. And that's what this assessment is all about, figuring out how AI impacts all those existing structures and processes.
So you're basically connecting the dots, making sure AI isn't treated like this separate, isolated thing.
You got it. And the guide actually suggests doing an organizational impact assessment. Who needs to be in the loop on AI risks? Are those risk committees we talked about actually talking about AI?
It's like a reality check, right? Are we walking the walk or just talking the talk?
Exactly. And then, of course, there's data privacy and protection.
Oh boy, that's a big one these days, right? GDPR, CCPA, all those acronyms flying around.
And AI just adds another layer of complexity, right? AI systems are trained on massive amounts of data.
Right, so there are concerns about re-identification, even from data sets that are supposed to be anonymous?
Exactly. Plus, there's the risk of the models themselves leaking sensitive information.
So even with all those regulations, existing privacy frameworks might not be enough.
They're a good starting point for sure,
Oh.
but AI forces us to think about privacy in new ways.
Okay, so what do organizations need to do?
Ask tough questions. Are those data protection impact assessments really robust enough for AI? Are we minimizing bias in our training data? Are there safeguards to prevent these models from memorizing personal data?
It's like AI is making us rethink our whole understanding of privacy.
In a way, it is. And it's not just about preventing misuse. It's about making sure the data we use is reliable and unbiased in the first place. Remember, bad data in, bad AI out.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, what other areas need this kind of reassessment in light of AI?
Let's talk cybersecurity.
Oh, yeah, another big one.
Right. The guide highlights how AI creates these unique security risks that traditional IT security just wasn't built for.
Like what kind of risks?
Things like adversarial inputs, where someone intentionally messes with data to trick an AI system, or model theft, where they actually steal the underlying code of your AI.
Whoa. It's like AI opens up a whole new world of potential attacks.
It does, and organizations need to update their defenses accordingly. Are we testing our AI for manipulation? Are we monitoring for this thing called model drift, where its performance, including security, could get worse over time?
So it's not just about protecting data anymore, it's about protecting the AI itself.
Exactly. And it might require new security measures, like maybe your model monitoring system needs to be integrated with your overall security monitoring.
It's like a whole new level of complexity.
It is. And then there's the existing model governance and validation.
Okay, break that down for me. What's that all about?
So certain industries like finance, healthcare, they already have these robust model risk management frameworks.
All right, because they're dealing with sensitive stuff.
Exactly. And the guide argues that AI models, especially these complex machine learning models, they should be integrated into those existing processes.
You're saying we shouldn't treat AI like some special snowflake when it comes to risk management.
Precisely. But here's the catch. Traditional model validation, it's often focused on accuracy. Is the model spitting out the right numbers?
Right, that makes sense. But with AI...
With AI, you got to think bigger. Fairness, bias, explainability, ethical impact, all that.
Right. It's not just about whether the AI is doing its job, it's about whether it's doing it responsibly.
Exactly. It's about the bigger picture. And that's why the guide suggests something called an AI impact assessment.
AI impact assessment. That's a mouthful.
Yeah, AI impact assessment, or AIA. Think of it like a privacy impact assessment, but for AI specifically.
So what kinds of questions are we asking here?
Things like, how could this AI system fail? Who would be harmed if it did? Do the benefits of using this AI outweigh the potential risks? Does it align with our values?
It's like a pre-flight check for your AI. Make sure it's ready for takeoff, ethically speaking.
Exactly. And these AI impact assessments are becoming more and more important. Some regulations, like that EU AI Act we talked about, they're starting to make them mandatory.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've laid out the why of AI governance. We've talked about assessing the risks, the rules, and even our own internal systems. But how do we actually put all this into practice?
That's where the fourth component comes in, building an AI governance operating model.
Okay, now we're talking. This is where the rubber meets the road.
You got it. We're moving from the why to the how, and the guide lays out a clear framework for building an effective operating model. So are you ready to get into the nuts and bolts of making AI governance a reality?
Absolutely. Let's build this thing. All right, let's build this AI governance operating model. Where do we even begin?
So the guide starts with the governance structure, right? You need a solid foundation, clearly defined roles.
Because it's like, who's doing what? Who's in charge of making sure all this actually happens?
Right. The guide suggests setting up a cross-functional AI governance committee, bring in people from different departments.
So we're talking legal, compliance, IT, even the folks actually building and using the AI.
Exactly. You need all those perspectives. You don't want to just look at AI from a technical angle or a legal angle.
Makes sense. It's like assembling the Avengers, right?
Mm.
You need all the different superpowers to handle this complex challenge.
I like that analogy. So on this dream team, you got to have an AI governance officer, someone who's really driving this whole thing forward.
Sounds like a pretty big job. What about the rest of the team? Who else is on this committee?
Well, you'll definitely have people from legal, compliance, IT, data science, all the usual suspects. But, and this is important, you also need people from the business units that are actually using AI.
Oh yeah, the folks on the front lines.
Yeah.
They know what's actually happening, where the potential problems might be.
Precisely. They bring that real-world experience to the table. So you've got the team, but how do you actually govern AI? How do you move from all this theory to actual practical action?
Yeah, how do we make this happen?
So the guide outlines some key mechanisms. One of them is an AI project risk review.
Okay, that's that.
So before you deploy any high-risk AI system, it has to go through this thorough review. The team responsible for that AI, they have to submit this detailed checklist covering bias, privacy, security, even the potential impact on jobs.
So it's like a checkpoint, right? Make sure the AI is both effective and ethical before it's unleashed on the world.
Exactly. And to keep things on track, the committee would have these regular AI ethics and risk committee meetings.
Yeah.
Maybe quarterly, something like that.
So like a regular health checkup for the organization's AI.
That's a great way to put it. And in these meetings, they'd be reviewing projects, talking about new risks that are popping up, making sure their governance framework is keeping up with all the changes that are happening in the AI world.
It's a constantly evolving landscape, right?
Yeah.
AI is moving so fast.
It is. And of course, this committee would be the ones creating and updating the actual AI governance policies, guidelines for data governance, model testing, documentation, incident response, all of that.
So it's not a one-time setup. It's a living, breathing thing that needs to constantly adapt.
Right. And with all these frameworks and processes, we can't forget about the human element, right?
Oh, absolutely. AI can't just run wild without any human oversight.
Exactly. The committee, they need to figure out which AI decisions actually require a human in the loop.
Like, for example, if an AI is recommending loan approvals, a human still needs to review those recommendations before a final decision is made.
Right. Or think about medical diagnoses. AI can be a huge help to doctors, but you wouldn't want an AI making those big decisions without a human being involved.
Makes sense. It's all about finding that balance, leveraging the power of AI while preserving that human judgment. But with all these committees, processes, how do you keep track of everything? Who's accountable when things go wrong?
Good question. That's where documentation and ownership come in. The guide is really big on having clearly designated AI system owners.
So like one person is responsible for each AI system.
Exactly. They're accountable for making sure the AI is being used responsibly, following all the policies.
So it's not just this vague collective responsibility. There are names attached to each piece of the puzzle.
Right. And to keep things organized, they recommend having this central AI inventory. Basically a master list of every AI system being used in the organization.
Like a map of the AI landscape so you know what's being used where and who's in charge.
Exactly. Transparency and documentation, that's how you build trust, right?
Absolutely. Okay, so this all sounds great in theory, but I'm sure some organizations are listening and thinking, okay, where do I even start?
Yeah, it can seem overwhelming. But the guide has some good advice. First off, leadership buy-in is crucial. This can't just be some grassroots effort driven by a few passionate people. The executives, the board, they need to be fully on board with this whole responsible AI thing.
So it's like any big organizational change. You need that top-down support to make it stick.
Absolutely. And then once you have that, start small. Don't try to boil the ocean. Pick a few AI projects and use them as pilots. Test things out, get feedback.
Like a beta test for your AI governance framework.
Exactly. Start small, learn, and then scale up.
Makes sense. What else?
Training and awareness are huge. You can have the best framework in the world, but if your employees don't understand it or aren't comfortable raising concerns, it's not going to work.
So it's about creating a culture where everyone feels responsible for AI, not just a select few.
That's the goal. And last but not least, you need a framework that's adaptable, right? What works for a tiny startup isn't going to work for a huge corporation.
Right, one size doesn't fit all.
Exactly. So you need to be flexible, figure out what works for your organization.
So we've talked about setting up the framework, defining roles, putting processes in place, even piloting our approach. But AI governance isn't a one-time thing, right? It's an ongoing process.
Oh, definitely. Implementing the framework is just the beginning. The fifth and final component is all about continuous governance, weaving this AI oversight into the very fabric of the organization.
Okay, so how do organizations make this sustainable? What does this continuous governance actually look like in practice?
The guide recommends a phased approach to implementation. First, you lay the foundation. You set up that AI governance committee. You define roles. You create those initial policies and risk assessment templates. You take stock of your existing AI systems.
So you're basically getting organized, setting the stage for success.
Right. Then, phase two, you start piloting those processes. You pick a few projects, test everything out, gather feedback, work out any kinks.
It's like a dress rehearsal before the big show.
Exactly. And then phase three, you go live. You roll out AI governance across the whole organization. It's no longer this separate thing. It's just how you do business.
It becomes part of the organizational DNA.
Exactly. And finally, phase four is all about maturity, continuous improvement. You regularly evaluate how well your governance is working.
Yeah.
You automate as much as possible, and you keep those policies up to date.
It's a never-ending cycle, right? Learning, adapting, improving.
It is. But how do we actually keep tabs on these AI systems once they're out in the wild doing their thing? How do we make sure they're behaving the way they're supposed to?
That's a good question. We can't just assume everything will be fine, right? We need some kind of oversight.
Right. And that's where the monitoring and reporting piece comes in. The guide talks about two main types of monitoring that are essential for AI governance.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for me. What are these two types? All right, so you're saying there are two types of monitoring. What are they?
Okay, so the first one is operational AI monitoring. This is all about keeping tab on how the AI is actually performing in real time, looking for any signs that something might be off.
So what kind of signs? What are we looking for here?
Things like, is the model still accurate? Is it showing any bias? Is there any drift? Even just how is it being used? Are there any weird patterns there?
Hold on. Drift. You keep using that word. What does that mean?
Oh, right. So think about it like this. You train your AI model on a certain set of data, right? It learns to make predictions based on that data. But the world changes. New data comes in, things shift, and what was accurate before might not be accurate anymore.
Ah, so the AI is getting out of sync with reality.
Exactly. And it can happen so gradually. That's why continuous monitoring is key. You want to catch those little changes before they become big problems.
So what kind of tools do you use for this kind of monitoring?
Well, a lot of organizations will use their existing IT monitoring tools, but you might need to add AI-specific metrics, The key is to set up alerts so you know right away if something's weird, like if accuracy suddenly drops and bias goes up.
So you're not just passively watching, you're actively looking for trouble.
Right, exactly. And the second type of monitoring is compliance and risk monitoring. This one's more about making sure your AI systems are sticking to the rules, the governance policies you've put in place.
So it's about checking the AI's homework, making sure it's behaving ethically.
Exactly. And a lot of organizations use these things called AI scorecards to keep track of everything. They give you a snapshot of the AI's compliance, bias tests, audit results, any incidents that have happened.
Like a report card for your AI.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got monitoring in place, but even with the best systems, AI can still make mistakes, right? It can even cause harm. How do you handle that?
That's where incident response comes in. Just like with cybersecurity, you got to have a plan, right? Yeah. Clear protocols for dealing with AI failures.
So what does that look like? What's the plan?
Well, first, you got to notify the right people, right? Then you do a deep dive to figure out what went wrong, why it happened. And then you update your policies to prevent it from happening again.
So it's not just about putting out fires, it's about learning from them, making your AI system stronger, more resilient.
Exactly. And sometimes, depending on the industry, you might even have to report these incidents to regulators. Show them you're taking this seriously, You're committed to responsible AI.
Right, it's about accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but even with monitoring and incident response, AI models can still degrade over time, become vulnerable to new threats. How do you stay ahead of that curve?
That's where continuous risk management and model validation come in. AI governance, it's not a one and done thing. You got to be vigilant, you got to adapt.
It's like a constant game of whack-a-mole.
In a way, yeah. Especially for high-risk AI models, regular reviews are key. And it's often a good idea to bring in an outside expert, someone who can give you an objective assessment.
Like a second opinion from an AI doctor?
Exactly. And the guide also recommends stress testing your AI models. Really pushing them to their limits to see how they hold up.
Intense. How do you do that?
Well, there's this thing called AI red teaming. It's kind of like ethical hacking, but for AI. You're trying to break it, find its weaknesses before someone else does.
So you're deliberately trying to make the AI fail.
Exactly. You're looking for vulnerabilities so you can fix them before they cause real problems. And then there's model drift, remember? You got to keep an eye on that, too.
Yeah, how do you deal with that on an ongoing basis?
The guide recommends automating bias and drift detection. So you have these tools running in the background, constantly checking the AI's performance, flagging anything suspicious.
Like a watchdog, always on guard.
That's a good way to put it. And then, of course, you got to stay on top of all the new regulations that are coming out all the time. The AI landscape is constantly changing, so you got to be ready to adapt.
It sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
How do you keep up with all of this?
It's a challenge for sure. But the key is to build this culture of continuous learning and improvement. The guide talks about setting up specific performance metrics for your AI governance, so you can actually measure how well you're doing.
So it's not just about checking boxes, it's about showing results.
Right. You might track things like how many risk assessments you've done, how many issues you caught early on, whether you've seen a decrease in AI-related incidents. The goal is to use that data to make your policies better, to constantly strive for improvement.
It's like a never-ending cycle of learning and refining.
It is. And that means everyone involved with AI, from the people building it to the people using it, they all need to be educated about this stuff, about responsible AI. It's a team effort.
It really is. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. This AI governance framework guide, it's really packed a lot of information into a pretty straightforward document. What's the main message you want our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
I think the big takeaway here is that AI governance, it's not optional anymore. It's essential. If you're serious about using AI safely and ethically, you need a plan. You need a framework.
It's about being responsible with this incredibly powerful technology, not just for companies, but for society as a whole.
Exactly. It's not just about following the rules. It's about doing the right thing.
And this guide, it gives us a roadmap for doing just that, building a future where AI is a source for good.
Well, that was a deep dive, and I feel like we all learned a lot today. To our listeners out there, don't be afraid to ask tough questions. Demand transparency. Advocate for responsible AI. It's a journey we're all on together.